it's not like you're stabbing somebody. The damage is self-inflicted.
And it's a really subjective thing to call someone bad for doing something that you don't particularly think you could do.
I just want to throw this out. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
I mean, in many ways, ideologically, the terrorists won with that event. And I look back and think like, oh, that was not really cool of me. And yet there are probably people out there still holding a grudge against me for doing that very thing, thinking that that's how I am, that's who I am, and letting that moment define their interpretation of whether I'm good or evil.
And I think people should be given second chances and an opportunity to make amends and learn from their experiences. Because otherwise, well, why don't we just kill everybody who doesn't know any better? Welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we would really love it if you like and share this video and subscribe to the channel and hit that stupid little bell, because apparently that's how you subscribe nowadays. Yeah.
It lets people know when we put new stuff up, which we do pretty regularly. So if you're not on that circadian kitchen sink microscopy rhythm yet, hit that little bell and you don't have to worry about it. So we also write our own music, which you can hang out to the end of the episode to hear. And then if you like it, a little teaser that we give you, you just head on over to patreon.com/KSMvidcast and you can become the proud owner of our music. So having trouble with this beer. It's
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Woo.
Oh, what kind of beer is that?
Trooper by Iron Maiden.
Whoa. That's an evil looking dude right there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking, what exactly is evil? What makes a person bad per se? Like, you hear about this all the time. Like, somebody does something, let's say like they robbed somebody at gunpoint or whatever. I was like, oh, that's a bad dude. But what if he's, spending every week at the homeless shelter feeding people or whatever? It's like what exactly quantifies a person as being bad?
That's an interesting question. I mean, that is that's almost a what is the meaning of life kind of question to ponder, because yeah, I mean, you could say somebody who does something one time that is really bad, like Timothy McVeigh, right? Blew up a building, some people died, and really bad. But what does that make him an evil person because of this one act? Like you said, robbing a store or a bank or something, stealing things this one time is one unfortunate event, unfortunate decision, and maybe one could say an evil decision. If there's one decision in your life that is truly evil, but the rest of your life is full of goodness, you're doing good things, which carries more weight? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the way we grade in schools or the way credit scores work. It's like you work really hard to get a good reputation, and one bad thing happens and your score plummets, and you basically have an even harder time climbing out of that hole after that.
Yeah. I think, I guess to me, what would make somebody evil is a history of repetitious actions that are reprehensible, like actual bad things, and it has to be intentional because intent is everything.
Yeah.
If you are just a klutz and kill people accidentally because you're a complete dumbass and you drive forklifts through people's stomachs over and over again, well, I don't know that makes you evil.
You didn't steal the drive plate.
Yeah, exactly. The Red Dwarf reference there. That doesn't make you evil. If you're in a bad situation, something that you have no control over, and you react to it, like people should look up Killdozer as a good example of this. Like somebody who did something pretty crazy, but he was kind of backed into a corner, and I think most people would respond in a similar way. Maybe not the same mechanically, but in action. And so, I think you have to kind of use a little empathy and put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you were in the same situation, would you be able to be a holy person or something? Would you be able to weather all of the bad things that happen, or would you snap and do something bad?
Yeah.
And I think I guess what would make a person evil would be somebody who, in the absence of adversity, chooses to harm other people. That would be, I think, the defining line. Because I think in the case of adversity, you're kind of like down on your luck. You're down to, you have, you're hanging by a thread, and it's a situation of desperation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of changes the color of one's actions.
Yeah.
And
So
so if you're somebody, you live in a palace and you have people, palm fronds, they're fanning you every day and feeding you grapes and stuff, yet you still kill people for no reason, I think that makes you evil.
yeah, I think there's certainly some cases that are a little more black and white than shades of gray, like Ted Bundy or Hitler or whatever, where there's a whole lot of repeated bad stuff, and it's clearly done with intent and with the intent to continue doing it, and things of that nature. But why don't we start painting some more complex everyday situation pictures in like hypotheticals, and maybe discuss like and I don't know if you can come up with any off the top of your head, but I kind of have an idea for something. So maybe we can discuss like what would make a person bad in this situation. Let's say you've got a guy and a girl, and they're, let's say, married, and the girl is let's say she's got some kind of disability that prevents her from working, and she depends on this guy for care and shelter and food and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they're increasingly unhappy together, and the guy meets some other girl and then has this decision, right? So he could either leave his wife and then be seen by her friends as this bad guy that totally ditched her for some other woman, or he can try to, capture a little positive feelings for himself in a sordid affair, which is almost like a Schrodinger's cat when it comes to whether it's actually harming his wife or not, based on whether or not she knows it's happening. The harm is staved off until that point. But which avenue would make him the bad guy? Because he's going to lose either way.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you're asking somebody who's polyamorous. non-monogamous. So I my own interpretation is going to be a little bit different than the general public.
Well, we'll build on the assumption that neither party has mutually agreed on a polyamorous or open relationship situation.
Yeah, it's a matter of it's a matter of consent at that point. Ooh, yeah. I mean, because going back to biology, like, because I don't think that people biologically are monogamous. Oh God. Okay, you opened a can of worms there.
I mean, strictly sociologically speaking, though, the norms and mores that we have as, you know, a modern American society, you know, in the majority, you know, obviously cheating is seen as bad, but you know, abandoning someone, you know, for, you know, younger or whatever, you know, like that's also seen as, you know, kind of low, or you know.
Yeah, I would argue that the cheating aspect is a lot less damaging than abandonment, especially if you have some sort of situation, in particular, a partner who's in some way dependent on the other partner. If you go out and explore and do some stuff with another person, it really, well, I mean, it depends on your interpretation, but it probably doesn't impact you as much as the person saying, "Hey, get out of my house."
Mm-hmm.
Go.
Yeah.
It's wintertime. See ya. You know.
Yeah.
And so.
And I mean, there's a third option that's like pretty clearly bad, and I see this on like real crime shows all the time. It's like, well, he could just kill his wife and make it look like an accident. But I mean, I think everyone would kind of agree that's a no-no.
Yeah, that's totally crossing a line because it's totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like, just because you have feelings for another person doesn't make the other person meaningless. Like, like, you're my friend, and I
Yeah.
have other friends that are the same. Like, we can coexist. Like,
oh, wait, you can't have another friend and still like me as much as a friend, because, you know, admiration and, you know, like all that, and love and all that stuff, it's like pie, you know, like you slice off a piece and you only have so much, and that's why people who have 10 kids totally don't even love the last 5.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This turned from a discussion about evil and bad people to non-monogamy. And you know what?
Well, it's a good example, I think, because there's a lot of things that get attached to that,
Yeah.
that run really long term, like the once a cheater, always a cheater sort of mentality, that follows somebody. Whereas, like, you could maybe make the argument that if he just like divorces her or whatever, it'll be pretty bad for a while, but eventually, you know, she'll meet someone and things will get better and everyone is forgiven and forgotten or whatever. And
Yeah.
you know, but there, that stigma of cheating does follow people, but should it? Is it true?
I think the weight applied to those kinds of situations is a little bit too heavy
Mm-hmm.
for the real world impact they actually have. Because to me, looking at it, it's not like you're stabbing somebody. The damage is self-inflicted, and depending on how you perceive it, it's going to be different. Like, uh, I am not one who is monogamous, and I have multiple partners, and my partners have other partners, and it really doesn't matter. Like, I enjoy meeting partners and hanging out and doing fun things, and it the thought of harm never crosses my mind. So I look at those situations, I'm like, look, just chill out and it'll be okay. Don't kill the other person over some sex. You just had sex. It's not that big of a deal. And you don't have to leave your partner because you find somebody else attractive. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that would find your particular style of relationships to be bad, quote unquote bad. And, it's kind of interesting that, we kind of diverged into this. Like, we probably could do a whole episode on this easily, but, I, I don't personally know that I could do something like that. It feels like higher maintenance than I could really give attention to, but I don't see any problems with it. I actually think that it makes a lot of sense. And it's a really subjective thing to call someone bad for doing something that you don't particularly think you could do.
Yeah.
Like, why thrust your morality or whatever on other people?
Or your social norms on somebody,
because it's not even morality, really.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of goes into that territory, but I think okay. I feel like we're gonna start talking about polyamory, and that's okay. We should probably actually do that sometime. But I want to go back to this whole what is evil and bad people and all this stuff. I mean, yeah, like you'd said, Hitler, I think we can agree he's a bad guy. And a lot of his underlings within a certain tier of hierarchy are all bad people. But I think the lines blur a little bit as you go further down, and especially if you talk about somebody who's kind of a standalone person like Timothy McVeigh. I just want to throw this out. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. We're like, America, yeah, here. And we have done a lot of the same things, and we consider ourselves to be the good guys. But you go to other countries and they look at us, well, the United States as a government, as being the aggressors, the bad guys. And so
it's all perspective. We absolutely are the bad guys to a lot of places, but we find some way to justify it and placate the people to the point where usually we just throw around the word freedom and say that somebody's a terrorist and everyone's on board.
We say freedom, and as we stifle freedom, go figure that one.
It's always, we're fighting for our freedom. Well, was it in danger? Because we've been like a mega power for the last 70 plus years.
And speaking of terrorist events, 9/11, I remember Bush at the time coming out in the media and saying, well, they hate our freedoms and this is why we need to do all this stuff and attack these people and stuff. And we passed the Patriot Act, which is completely antithetical to freedom. It's just like, oh, they hate our freedoms, so let's destroy our own freedoms.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, ideologically, the terrorists won with that event, because the way things have turned tide have not been for the better, really.
Do you remember my post on MySpace about that? The terrorists win. That was back in 2002 or something like that. Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. It's all about perspective. It's about what angle you're seeing it from. Imagine if somebody from another country occupied the United States because they were terrorists. And they're killing people and drone striking everybody. Should we just sit back and be like, oh, they're fighting for our freedom? Or should we see them as aggressors or something. I don't think people, here's the thing. However you feel about a thing, you should take it and turn your own perspective around to the opposition and look through their eyes. And if the way you see the situation through their eyes is the same as the way you see it through your own eyes, it's probably okay. But if it's different, you should probably start asking questions, and you should probably start doing a little bit of research and talking to people, because I don't think things are black and white at all in these kinds of situations.
Yeah, and there's the other thing you got to consider is that people do change and mature over time.
Mm-hmm.
And like there are things I used to do that I would never even dream of doing now, and I look back and think like, oh, that was not really cool of me, and yet there are probably people out there still holding a grudge against me for doing that very thing, thinking that that's how I am, that's who I am, and letting that moment define their interpretation of whether I'm good or evil.
Well, it would be akin to saying like, well, I remember when you finger painted that painting and, when you were 6, and that's the definition of how you are an artist,
right,
in your 50s or something like that. No, you were still learning. You're a kid. You don't have those experiences, and experiences change people.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I'm going to step it down from murder, because that gets into too many nuances and stuff. But, let's say a guy is 18 and rapes a girl in his class or something, but by the time he's twice that age, 36 or something, he's a deacon for his church, and he does nothing but charity stuff, and he's happily married, and they have a great consensual sex life, and he's raising some kids and teaching them the right thing, like, don't be the way I used to be and stuff like that. And then his victim sees him at the store one day and just points in his face and screams, "Rapist!" Right in front of his kids or something. It's like, who's that helping? Like that's all point. Hypothetical, but it's like,
Yeah, well, it's kind of like judging somebody, like your measuring stick for judgment is based on the highest level of knowledge and understanding, and you're applying it to somebody who doesn't have that knowledge and understanding. And I think people should be given second chances and an opportunity to make amends and learn from their experiences. Because otherwise, well, why don't we just kill everybody who doesn't know any better? Which would basically be everybody on this planet, myself included. I'm a complete stupid ass idiot. So, yeah, let's. Why don't we just all die? We can't judge people in that way. We have to allow, because the whole point is that we should be striving to make the world a better place and improving. And no one, I don't care who you are, no one has the moral authority to judge another person, because you didn't live their life. You didn't experience the things they did. And so you can't be the judge in that situation. I mean, unless maybe you share the same experience, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's probably why you always see a defense team painting a portrait of the defendant's childhood and stuff like that, because I think it's totally relevant, because you do really have to try to put yourself in their shoes, as scary as that can be, and think like, is there a justification for what this person's being tried for, if they indeed did do it, like, because you can say, well, yeah, you did it, but when it comes time to deliberate over the punishment, that's where you really got to start thinking more about motive rather than what they did.
Yeah, and context. I think the
Mhm.
circumstances in which somebody grew up absolutely dictate how they're going to behave when they're older. You could take any of the worst people in history and look at what happened to them. Stalin, Hitler, you name it.
Yeah, Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Like if his parents had not divorced or something, he might have been a great lawyer.
Yeah. Well, and Hitler might have been a great painter.
Yeah.
If somebody just was like, "Hey, I'll buy that painting,"
Mhm.
maybe World War II would have played out a little bit differently. So, yeah, I think it's so easy for people because it's kind of like people cinematize things. Like we want to have everything in a nice, tidy little package with a perfect script. Like there's the good guys, there's the bad guys. Here's the hero, here's the villain.
Yeah.
The
feed us
antagonist.
your narrative.
Yeah, the antagonist, the protagonist, and it's clear cut. Well, real life isn't like the movies. Sorry to break it to you, but it is not like that. You don't shoot somebody with a machine gun and they go flying through a window. That doesn't work like that. I mean, that's just my example for factual inaccuracies in movies. Equal and opposite reactions kind of thing. But it applies to everything. Like real life doesn't work like that. It's a lot more nuanced. And we should also think, because I don't like the death penalty. I have a problem with it because you've killed somebody and essentially at that point they've won. Like they are free from judgment and improvement. And I think, well, why don't we try to make the world a better place? Like help somebody get better. Maybe they could do good in the world. Because I don't believe there's evil and there's good. I think there's just humans who do things based on their experiences. And sometimes they have ill intent and sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's altruistic things that people do, but those same people could do awful things at the same time,
Mhm.
And
there's two logical fallacies that tend to apply: hero busting and heroes all. Whereas with hero busting, oh, somebody did something bad, or they're associated with a certain group, so they're automatically just a bad person. Or on the flip side, like, oh, that guy is a police officer, so automatically I think he's a good guy.
yeah.
And there are clear and obvious exceptions, not just even like in the minority for either of those cases. Like you can be a good guy and do one bad thing and still be a good guy.
Yeah, exactly. And you could do a lot of bad things and do something good, and people will be like, "Oh, hey, you're a good person." I mean, it's kind of it's sort of this algorithmically derived sort of putting things in boxes kind of thing. And you get like, yeah, it feels good to do that, but that isn't the real world. Daryl Davis. I'm gonna we'll have to talk about Daryl Davis. Changing KKK people into supporters. Like, you would be like, oh, these KKK members, oh, they're terrible, awful people, lynching, and they hate black people and stuff. And if you've seen the stuff that he's done, he just had conversations with these people and they turned around and now they're his friends.
Yeah.
And have actually become allies,
Yeah, that's a really good example, actually, because I saw a video about some of the KKK members that he got to hang up their robes and whatnot, and they're sitting there on video with their arm around him. They're still calling him the N-word, which a lot of people would be like, oh, well, they're automatically still a racist, but it's like
it's not that black and white.
Yeah.
I mean, no pun. Well, is there a pun there? But
Uh, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But
at
it
least I
isn't
didn't
that
say
clear
it.
cut. It
Yeah.
can't be divided cleanly along those lines. And I think some change in a positive direction is immeasurably valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Like having just the fact that KKK members, high level, high ranking KKK members, are putting their arms around a black man is such a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even if they,
And that arm is not around the throat.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's an arm of friendship.
Yeah.
And, you know, even if they still hold on to stuff from the past, you know, that's okay because it's progress. We look at things at the point of, I guess maybe it's the whole internet generation and stuff. Like the instant now, you got to click and something happens.
Mm-hmm.
No, things take time. Progress takes time. You go through stages and evolution, and it progresses slowly. And you have to understand that a little bit of improvement is a big deal. It's better than going back. It's better than regression.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's not like you can buy a progressive pack on Amazon Prime and just like have it show up on a drone and apply it to this guy that you're talking to, and all of a sudden he's like human rights activist. You know,
yeah, yeah,
doesn't work.
exactly. Eventually, maybe that'll happen for some, and maybe not for others, and that's okay. Like progress is good. But that's just old. Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to the death penalty and maybe throw in another hypothetical, um, or fantasy. Have you seen the show Dexter?
Only a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
So
familiar with it.
the premise is there's a guy who was yeah, traumatized as a child, and his adoptive father saw these troubling psychopathic tendencies and knew that he would become a killer, and coached him to only kill people that were bad, that deserved it.
Hmm.
And so here you have a guy who's playing judge, jury, and executioner and killing people, but these are people who repeatedly kill and get away with it, or they luck out and some evidence was mishandled and they're back out on the street and they're gonna do it again. And here comes Dexter. Is Dexter the bad guy?
Ooh. I mean, probably not. I mean, I'm a huge fan of V for Vendetta. And I think that whole like blurred lines, like, are they a freedom fighter or a terrorist kind of thing? Like, and Dexter's a good example of that.
I mean, he has in the show, he has what he calls the code.
Mhm.
He it's basically morals. He applies a line of critical thinking to each and every person before he makes this really big decision.
Yeah.
So he's putting a lot of thought into it. He's giving them a fair shake and doing, using his position in the police department as a way to surreptitiously, look into them and vet them as being indeed worthy of his knife. So
Yeah, because here's the thing. Sometimes I think the law, or in the U.S., like as it exists, might be a little bit too lenient and subject to error.
well, and that's good because when we don't have access to seeing all the facts, because we do have to appreciate some certain personal liberties and stuff like that. um when we get an incomplete picture, we got to be pretty darn sure we're getting the right person.
Yeah, what's the saying? Like, it's better that a hundred criminals go free than one innocent man be imprisoned.
Yeah.
That kind of
but,
thing.
but
I think
what you
it's
have,
valid.
yeah, and what you have in this situation is a guy who is operating under the table effectively and violating a lot of constitutional rights in order to get all the information he needs to know for certain that the person did it.
I think the important thing there is that you point out that he has a code.
Mm-hmm.
there's a moral framework upon which he's building things. And as long as you give people a chance to explain themselves and maybe you analyze what's going on, if there's nuance there, that's okay. If he's just like lets people talk and then just like offs them, I have a problem with that.
No, he has let people off the table before he
Yeah.
killed them. You know, like they plead with him and they explain what's going on in their life or something, and he sits there and ponders it. And sometimes he's like, and just plunges a knife in. Other times he cuts the restraints and lets them go. And
That sounds a little bit. That sounds a little wild, but you know, here's the thing. I think our judicial system is a little too complex now, and has lost sight of its origins. So things like that might be okay.
Not that we're advocating vigilante justice and killing serial killers.
No, but you know. No, but you got to think about this. Here's the thing: if you're saving lives, if you know this person is going to kill other people or harm other people in some way, it might be justified to stop them.
Yeah, and I think that's the underpinning of the death penalty is to ensure that they don't someday escape or get an appeal. You know, I think that's the original intent maybe of, you know, the death penalty going back ages and ages, you know, like guillotines and whatnot, you know.
Whoa. Okay, French Revolution death penalty. I'd like to avoid that because that was, you know, Robespierre. Like, let's avoid that. That was a little too over the top. But that's a good point. Yeah, I think it's valid. And you know, for people to say, well, the law is the law, and the judicial system is just, and stuff, and it's like, I think if you look into it, you could say that it's pretty inept. It doesn't know any more than the average person does. And maybe it's okay for there to be something else going on underneath.
Yeah, it's okay for laws, and I would even go so far as to say your idea of ethics and morality. It's okay for those to be very detailed in what you think is good and bad, but you always have to have flexibility because no amount of words in the English language strewn together in a particular pattern are going to ever capture every instance that might fall under that umbrella. You know, there's always other things at play that have to be considered.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I would say, like, the idea that the condemned, if you will, have a chance to explain themselves. And I think that's why in the US we have the whole jury of your peers concept, which has changed, because I've been on a jury and I was never a peer of those people that were you know, on trial. And I think that's important, like, because you should be judged by people in your own socioeconomic level. But that's going down a whole different rabbit hole. Oh man, wow, we've gone in so many different directions here. But this is good. This is a good conversation.
No, I think it all ties together really well because good and bad, you know, evil or whatever you want to call it, it's I don't think it can ever really be defined by one particular thing because you got to look at the cumulative whole. Like, I don't know, like I've brought this up in a lightning round before. You know, what if the cure for cancer came from the Nazi experiments on the Jews? You know, the millions and millions of, or, you know, however far in the future you want to go, the billions of lives that could be saved by that discovery, does that account for the 6 million Jews?
Well, and a lot of our medical knowledge comes from pretty heinous things. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to recognize those things and say, hey, we probably shouldn't do those in the future. Yeah. But if we have this knowledge, we should use it to save lives.
Right. Just because something is born of evil doesn't mean it's destined to be evil.
Yeah. In fact, it could actually be a force for good, mm-hmm. even if it comes from an evil source. Yeah. And I mean, it'd be better if it didn't happen, but I don't know. Like
even Darth Vader changed his mind at the end and redeemed himself and became a Force ghost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think this subject is. I think what we can conclude from this is it's not black and white, and you can't define good and evil. In fact, I would challenge the viewers to define in a sentence good and evil, because I don't think it's possible without using words that mean good and evil. But yeah.
And think about your own experiences. Like, certainly everybody's done something that's probably been, considered bad or whatever, and maybe you've escaped the stigma, but think about how you would feel if you still carried that stigma and maybe apply that to other people, with something called empathy.
Yeah. Well, and how do those experiences influence your actions today? I think that sometimes some of the bad experiences people have had in the past lead them to do very good things in the future. Sometimes not, but sometimes and sometimes not. And that in that ambiguity is where all this exists. Like, I think it's, you can't say, well, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, I guess we probably covered a pretty good overview of good and evil, haven't we?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, that was good.
It certainly is kind of similar to the meaning of life, whereas there's never really an end to the conversation, but it's. I think it's definitely a good start, and I hope it'll get a good conversation going in the comments.
Yeah, exactly, and I would hope that it brings people to look at things through a different lens. Like, it's not black and white. You're looking at shades of gray or a spectrum in this regard. And in fact, we'll go into fuzzy logic one of these days, but you could be both good and bad at the same time. So there is that too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's probably a good point to conclude. Probably.
Yeah. So if you've got thoughts on it, go ahead and leave them in the comments here on YouTube, and check us out on Facebook as well. That's where we tend to promote a lot of the show stuff. So if you decided not to hit that bell or whatever, that's where you're going to find out about the new shows. So any other closing thoughts or?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point to end on. All right. But yeah, I would love to hear what other people have to say about everything we've said. Yeah, and check out the song on the way out. I'm sure it'll be a good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for deep sink diving with us into evil.
Evil.